Hello and welcome everybody to the Getting Started with Deliberate Practice in Software Testing webinar with our very special guest today, Matt Heusser. During the webinar, we're going to be talking about how testers can improve their skills by practicing them deliberately, touching on the different kinds of learning styles we all have, what katas are and how to use them, finding and making the most of opportunities to develop your testing skills, and how to find and work with others in order to get feedback on your progress. After we've covered all of that off, we're going to have some time for questions and answers, and that will be your opportunity to address any specific issues you might have in relation to your own learning, skills development, or your career path, or just to follow up on any of the points you heard during the webinar. Just by way of some housekeeping announcements before we get started, we'll be keeping everybody on mute throughout the entire webinar. If you do have any questions or comments, then please feel free to share them in the chat room and we'll pick them up during the Q&A session at the end of the webinar. We're aiming for around 30 minutes, but we said that last time and it lasted for an hour, so we'll see how things go. We're recording the webinar and we will share it with you via the Guruk blog as soon as the video has been processed. So if you need to drop off for some reason, don't worry, you'll be able to go check out the blog and catch up on the video there. Just by way of an introduction, my name's Simon Knight. I am the TestRail product manager. If you've got any issues, questions, suggestions about how we can improve your TestRail experience, you know who to reach out to. Before I became product manager, I spent 10 years or so working mainly as an independent software testing consultant, working with teams of all shapes, sizes, and geographies sometimes to help them deliver better software faster and with less bugs. Some of you may also know me from my work with the Ministry of Testing, where I hosted the first Test Bash conferences and helped produce some of the training for their testing dojo. If you want to stay in touch, you can follow me on the socials or on the Guruk blog or on my personal blog. Joining us today, we have Matt Heusser, sorry. I said I'd get that right. Matt has enjoyed a long and distinguished career in continuous pursuit of development and testing excellence, served as a director on the board for the Association for Software Testing, and has spoken and delivered training sessions at far too many conferences and events to list here. He's done all of that in addition to being the managing director of Excelon development, along with Justin Rohrman, who you'll know from our blog. He's also edited stickyminds.com and the book, How to Reduce the Cost of Software Testing, and much more besides. You can contact him via the xndev.com site or on Twitter. Matt, did I miss anything out?
I think you got it.
Awesome.
Or at least we can keep going on. We can keep going on for a very long time, but I think you hit the highlights.
Awesome. Good stuff. Do you want to just tell us a little bit about why you specifically wanted to do this talk?
Yeah, I think it's a little bit about the story. It's very similar to the story of the moth, which you might know, but I suspect our audience doesn't.
The story of the moth. No, I'm not sure I'm familiar with that one. Matt, do you want to tell us a little bit more?
Sure. Well, yeah, a moth. It's 8 o'clock at night. A moth flies into the doctor's office, and the sign says Dr. Smith, orthodontist. And he lays down on the couch and he says, Doc, you gotta help me. Well, what's the problem? Says Dr. Smith. The moth says, every day I wake up and I feel a little bit worse than the day before. Every day. When I come into work, I'm a little bit more sad. My job doesn't matter. If I didn't go into work, no one would notice, except for Mr. Johnston, my boss. And he really just likes to lord it all over me. He likes to tell me what to do. He likes it that he can tell me when to sit and when to stand. My job doesn't matter to anyone but Mr. Johnston's power, but I need the money. But it's not enough. I go home to an empty house. My wife has died. We used to have 2 incomes. I don't make enough with my job, but I can't get another one, and every month the bank account is a little bit lower. My son is also dead. I just buried him last week. My daughter has failed out of college, and she won't talk to me or return my phone calls. I'm worried she's drinking too much. And I drink too. It started with just a couple of shots to fall asleep, but now pretty much it's a fifth of whiskey, maybe a little bit less, every night to fall asleep. And sometimes I drink in the morning. And what's the point, Doc? Why bother to go on? Doctor says, I'm an orthodontist. I fix teeth. I give people braces. Why did you come in here? And the moth said, well, because the light was on. Right. So we're a little bit like that in software testing. We chase the bright and the shiny, even though that's not what we need, right? So we talk about, I don't know, fruity DevOps with infrastructure as code, with Jenkins, with continuously delivered blue-green split, and never step back and say, okay, all this tooling is great, but or Scrum or Kanban or whatever the process is, how do we get really good at the gig? Like when you move the card to in test, what do you do? Yeah. And the assumption seems to be, oh, it's pretty obvious. Like anybody can take a requirements document and turn it sideways, and for every the system shall, you write a test scenario to make sure you do it. Like this isn't very hard. And then we wonder why we have bugs in production. Yeah. And with the compression I see with test cycles now, where we're going to production every 2 weeks is slow, and we're going to production 5 times a day, we're just shipping buggy code to prod and patching it all the time. I want to talk about how to get really good at testing.
Yeah, that sounds awesome, Matt. I'm not sure whether you're aware of it as a kind of heuristic, but I've been reading, or I have read about a thing called the craftsman's approach to tool selection, which is kind of an interesting, like I say, heuristic, a rule of thumb as to whether or not you should use a tool, because it's going to give you some marginal gain versus all of the other things that you could do that might be of more benefit. And I think that's kind of what you're getting at, isn't it? The thing that's going to give us the most benefit as software testers is actually working on those deep software testing skills, right?
Well, certainly not working on it doesn't allow us to differentiate ourselves from anybody off the street. And certainly if you're good at it, you can find lots of bugs quickly, and that seems to be a skill that's important. Absolutely. So why don't we talk about it? Like, why don't we talk about it? I went to CAST in 2010, which was in Grand Rapids, Michigan. It's a conference for the Association for Software Testing, one of the most cerebral, actual tester-ish conferences there is. And there was one presenter, Jean Ann Harrison, that put up a slide and said, how would you test this? And I don't think that topic came, it might have been in some of the tutorials, but I don't think that topic came up in the tracks so much. Yep. So let's talk about it. And if you can't get out to a conference, let's do it on a webinar.
All right, let's do it. So we were going to start off, Matt, I think, by talking about learning styles. So Do you want to tell us why we're talking about learning styles? What are they? Why are they important?
Sure. Well, I think it feeds directly into that. You go to a conference and you never actually do the testing. You talk about the process. You talk about the handoff. You never actually do it or have any sort of simulation where you try to do it. And there's exceptions to this, right? But most of the training that I have seen in testing, by and large, is designed for visual or auditory learners. And you look at someone who is looking at projecting a screen, and they are saying, first you take the requirements and then you create the test cases. Most testers, so you'd think that there'd be some knowledge transfer there, and maybe there's some memorized words and some process. But a lot of people are kinesthetic learners. That means they learn through touch and doing with their hands. They actually think of it like you're learning commands on the keyboard, like Control C and Control V. And when you've done that enough times, your brain just does it. You don't need to look. You don't need to think. It's habituated. And as a percentage of the population, my experience is I don't have a formal survey, but by asking people to raise their hands and that sort of thing, so a larger percentage than the regular population of testers are kinesthetic learners. We're drawn to testing because we learn by doing, and that's how we learn about the software, by testing it, and we learn about testing by doing testing. And I think that the visual auditory learners are reasonably well represented, but I don't know that's how you do skills transfer. Reading and writing can work for things like bug advocacy. There's a Blackbox software testing course on bug advocacy that's heavy on the writing, and I think that's good. But how often in training do we say, here's some software, test it. Now step back, what did you learn? Let's talk about it. What would you do next? The answer is not nearly enough. And if you can't get to training, if you can't spend $1,000 a day to, or even €500 a day to get to one of those classes, plus travel time, plus airfare, plus if you can't do that, well, we thought we'd bring it to you through this webinar, or at least enough to get started.
So we have, I think it would be fair to say, a hypothesis that most testers or a large proportion of testers have a kinesthetic learning style. Is that, would that be correct?
I'd say a larger percentage than the general population, and those people are underserved. And not only that, let's be frank, even if you are primarily a visual learner, you will train yourself by doing the testing. It's skill development. It's like playing with scales on your piano. You want to do testing deliberately while observing what you're doing and studying it while experimenting to get better.
Yep. So it wouldn't be a true testing webinar, I don't think, if we didn't put our hypothesis to the test. So we're actually gonna poll you guys that are listening to the webinar, and in the background, whilst we continue talking, we're going to be asking you via the Perl, via the GoToMeeting window, what your preferred learning style is, and then we can get back to you all with the results at the end of the webinar. Okay, so while that's going on, we are going to talk about testing katas. Matt, I literally have no idea what a testing kata is, beyond what I've put here on the slide. I don't even know whether I'm saying the word right. Is it pronounced kata? What is a
Sure.
testing kata?
Anyway. So I've heard it pronounced, and I'm not really sure either. And if you made a list of the people in the world that should know, I'd probably be on it, right? So what I will say is that in the martial arts, there's this idea of a kata, which is a repetitive motion activity, right? And and you do it over and over and over again, and then it's usually a test, and they say you did it right, and now you can get another colored belt. Developers do this. They do something similar, where they'll have a problem like the bowling problem or the Roman numeral katas, personal favorite of mine, where you write software where you type in a number and it tells you the Roman numeral or vice versa. It's pretty simple. And then you do it over and over and over again. And there's two ways to do it. You can either try to make your form better, so you create a better code faster as a programmer, or sometimes you might create the exact same form, and then you're learning faster keystrokes, right? But it completely breaks down when it comes to testing, because if you're like, we're going to test this website, well, I found all the bugs the first time. Now what? Test it again. Well, here are all the bugs. Like, wow, what? So there's a couple of different ways you could do this. One is just think of a kata as a challenge. I mean, conceptually, yeah, you could build a website that's got 50 different subdomains that all have specific bugs fixed, and you could simulate, okay, that bug is fixed, now go do this. But it's still not repetitive practice. It's still not like playing the scales on your piano or learning guitar. There's variation in it. So what one of the things we do at Excelon with these, we used to have a program called the Miyagi-Do School of Software Testing, where we would run people through these exercises, and there'd be variations on a theme, so that as you move through the exercises, you see similar problems and you train your brain. I think it's old enough now that I can give away one of the original ones. We went through this whole exercise, and I've done it, gosh, I don't know, with 1,000 people, and no one has ever said, what are the requirements? Because it's with the physical object that everyone just assumes that it's obvious. And if they had asked what are the requirements, then they would get the bug, the major showstopper bug, very quickly. And then we do that on a variation on a theme, and by the time they're testing the fourth or fifth one, the first words out of their mouths are, what are the requirements? Right? And if that's all they learn, that's probably good. And the idea being here that you can try something different on software where if it breaks, you're not in trouble. So most of the time when we have our production software and we say we're going to go to, I'm making this up, we're going to do session-based test management next sprint instead of whatever we did before. Well, what if it doesn't work? Well, the testers get fired or get in trouble. What if bugs slip through? Well, there's consequence. What if it takes longer? Consequence. So you can't experiment. You can't step back and say, how was that? And it's very hard under time pressure to step back and say, how was that process working for me? What should I change? And Scrum is great and gives you a framework to do continual improvement. And I've worked with a lot of teams, done a lot of Scrum, haven't seen a lot of improvement in test because of that system of forces. We're under time pressure. We don't have time to step back. And there's risk if we get it wrong. So we'll kind of do what we did before. And unless you bring a consultant in like me, and then if it doesn't work, you can fire the consultant and blame the consultant. You're probably not going to get the changes you want. So let's just start with some little exercises we can do over our lunch hour to experiment and learn about tests. And if we have some success there, then we can apply that to our day job.
So what's the kind of key benefit of a kata? Is it the repeatability? Is it kind of the is it like a muscle memory sort of thing where, you know, through repeating that exercise over and over again, you can do it in the future without even really thinking about it? Is that the main takeaway?
I do think it's a little bit different because, like I said, we're going to introduce variations. So you say, well, how can we, you know, skill development, most skill development, like let's teach some 8-year-olds how to play soccer. They're going to kick the ball from the same place to the same place over and over and over again every week. And at the end of 8 weeks, they're going to be better at kicking the ball. It doesn't really work like that in testing. But if we have a variety of exercises that are similar enough, So for instance, you want to learn quick attacks and you have software that's seeded with some bugs.
Yep.
And there's lots of places you could take that. So how do you report on those bugs? How do you assess the quality of that system? How do you, what techniques would you use to test? What if you're interested in security? What if you're interested in performance? But it trains your brain to see failure patterns. So you start to go, aha. So if you have more data points, you can, in your own brain, do kind of an analysis, make sort of a line, so that when you come to something, this is like something I've seen before. And when I tried this, I got this result. And so I'll try that. And a lot of that is implicit. So last week, I was in Columbus, Ohio, working with a team, testing a piece of software that had, I'd say, 3-4 hours of scope to really do a good job testing it. And it looked to them like I was just bouncing around, screwing around, checking this out, checking that out, doing stuff. Just like to a small child, I don't mean to be arrogant, but to a small child observing a chess master, it would look like chaos. But actually, the chess master knows what's going on. I'm not a chess master. I'm not like super magical, but I have done enough skills where I can go in and do this work and then report on results, and they'll stand up to scrutiny. I can defend how I spent my time. And getting there takes practice, and you're probably not going to be able to practice on production systems.
Yeah. So it's important to be able to name some of those activities as well, isn't it? So when it looks as though you may just be doing random stuff, you can say something like, "No, I'm galumping right now. I'm carrying out a shoe test or whatever."
Yeah. I would like I'm doing quick attacks to discover how the system falls over, and then I am modeling the coverage within the system that's left, and then I am exploring the things that are either buggy. So it's triage then, right? Like if it's super buggy, you don't go into it because the whole screen's messed up.
Yeah.
And if it's super clean, you don't put a ton of time into it. But if it's in the middle, that's when you want to start diving in. So dive in and quit, and focusing and defocusing are two heuristics that I use frequently. So then explaining what you did is another way to add value.
Yeah.
Which is hard to do when you're by yourself.
Well, there's no need to, right? You already know what you did. You mentioned something a few moments ago. You talked a little bit about software that is seeded with bugs, right? Which is a good segue into the next thing we're going to talk about, because testing katas sound great. It's a really good idea to repeat things over and over again, so that you build up that muscle memory, and you have that picture in your mind of failure modes and ways in which to test different kinds of software. But it kind of begs the question, where can I do that? Are there places I can go? Is there software I can test? Are there websites I can practice on? And how, once I've done that, can I get feedback on whether my testing was any good or not? Matt, what can you tell us about
that? So I think what you're saying is, what do I go test? And I'm going to be maybe a little blunt about this, because when I ask what do I go test, the sarcastic response from the community is everything. Bugs are everywhere, so you can just go to any website and you can just test and you find lots of bugs. Sorry, that was not respectful of me. But it's not true. If you want to test software deliberately to learn, you need to scope the problem so it's small enough that you can test it in a reasonable period of time, and not so small that it's obvious. And then it needs to have a reasonable amount of bugs. So if you test Amazon or maybe eBay, and you find a very small subsection of it, you explore for 20, 30, 40 minutes, you may not find anything. Now, if your goal is to move from tester to kind of junior product owner and provide design advice to help find how to make it better, you might find some usability problems. But a lot of those websites they're pretty good, right? So you really want to find something that's scoped well. And there's a couple that I think were set to email after the session. Part Calc is a famous one. It's actually modeled after the Grand Rapids airport. HackthisSite.org is a security one, and there's an OpenGoat, which is another security piece of software. And we're going to talk about Palindrome, I think, a little bit later.
Yep. What was that last one you mentioned? OpenGoat.
I think so. I'll get a link to you. But
yeah,
that's actually a security one where they actually give you hints and then slowly increase the challenge. So first you look for password in the comments, and then you look for SQL injection, and you look for JavaScript injection, and if you can't figure it out, it'll give you a hint. So it's actually a training program.
Okay.
It's a little old, but it's open source, and it's freely available.
Somewhere else that sprung to mind while we were just talking is James Lindsay's kind of famous within the testing community Blackbox testing software that you can probably find via his site. So I'll post a link to that as well.
And I'd recommend,
some folk, I guess, may be familiar with those from the testing workshops at conferences and things.
I'd recommend doing that in a pair. Those are little machines, they're little GUIs that you click and they respond, and you have to figure out how and why they're responding. What's the pattern?
Exactly.
Right? So if you know that going in yourself, I guess it's fine, but it could be fun to work on that with a pair. So someone who already knows it has scoped it for you, explained it properly, and you come in and then you have to explain it to them to their satisfaction. If you just kind of play with it, some testers will just light up with curiosity and just go after it. My experience was sort of, why am I here? Like, what's the mission? Like, what? I'm confused. So I think it can be done with a good facilitator. It can be even better.
Yep. So when we're testing software, you've mentioned a few times that we should try working with other people because we need feedback, right? We need to understand whether our testing performance was good or not, and probably one of the best and arguably easiest ways we can go about doing that is by getting feedback from other people. Is that fair to say?
Sure. Yeah, it's very different if you don't have a customer and you're like, look at all the bugs I found. Well, do you know if those were important to the customer? Do you know that you communicated in a way the customer could understand? If you don't have a customer, you could be very proud of yourself. I could be very proud of myself and be doing work that is not really relevant. I could get very good at doing work that is not really relevant. So figuring out what the customer's needs are and how to communicate to them, especially when you have a proxy customer, when you have a product owner, and the product owner says that's not important, but you think it kind of is, that's definitely another skill you can develop with deliberate practice. So
some ways in which I guess you might be able to reach out to other testers that are able to provide you with some feedback if you don't have a product owner or other members of your team around you who are readily able to do that. You could maybe engage with the software testing community some.
Yeah, there's a couple of different ways I wanted to mention. One is if you can hook in with a startup. Right now, I'm working with a startup called PingPad, and my company Excelon is actually helping them test. And it's little tiny project. It's a few hours a week. But we're using that as an opportunity to do deliberate practice, where it's more about working with a customer, learning from them, seeing what's important to them, figuring out if we're on the mark, how can we do, better test strategies. Then there's startups, don't have a ton of funding. And they might pay you back in reputation. They might pay you back with connections. They might pay you back in experience. It might not even be money. But especially if you're saying, I can put in a couple hours on a Saturday. Well, then you're looking for something other than money here. Open source software in the open source community is another way to do it. Just about any Windows-based open sourcey tool like OpenOffice will have all kinds of bugs. And if you can contribute those bugs back and they are fixed, that's actually career enhancing. But you're still learning about how to get good at testing. And of course, the test community itself. So there's weekend testing, Ministry of Testing, Association for Software Testing, and just testers on Twitter. There are a lot of people that you can just go to and say, hey, give me a testing challenge. And that person will benefit in learning to deliver these challenges and building their own reputation while you're getting some skill development. And I think we're supposed to send some links to people that register for the webinar afterward to those things.
Yeah, I'll include some links to the weekend testing MOT and that's the Ministry of Testing and the Association for Software Testing links on the blog post that we release after the webinar. There was some other stuff I think we wanted to kind of cover off. I've got dojos on my list here. Matt, can you tell us some more about those?
Sure.
Are they still a thing?
That's another martial arts analogy that I'm not exactly 100% sure how it transfers.
What's the difference between a dojo and a kata, Matt?
Right. So a dojo is the place you do the training. You come to the dojo and you meet the daimyo, I think. I don't know. But you meet the master and the master trains you in this little building, right? And from what I have seen in testing, that often looks like, well, one company that we talked to about this was a large multinational, and they actually brought in coaches, and they would bring the team into this space, physical space, with the coach for 2 weeks at a time, a sprint, and it's kind of an infrastructure development sprint. So they look at their test strategy or they look at their tooling, and over the course of that, they're mostly focused on how do we get better at the stuff we're doing. They look at their work in progress and they say, we want to test this sprint, but we want to do it differently. We want to do it with a more, with a coverage model that introduces randomization. Which is a fancy way of saying we're going to move from writing all this stuff down and doing it exactly the same to a more simultaneous learning, test design, test execution. And while we're doing that, we're also going to add unit tests. And while we're doing that, we're also going to improve the CI system. And while we're doing that, we're going to include the deploy system. So you got the whole team there. You have a couple of different experts, and they work on that, work on they work on the work of the team, right? Deliberately, with attention, with focus, with someone there to review their work. And I think the dojo part is someone there to review your work and give you feedback while you do it.
Yeah, that's a really key point for all of the stuff that we've talked about today, I think, isn't it? Having somebody to give you feedback on the work you're doing.
Mm-hmm.
So a couple of other things. I've got testing games and mystery games. So, I mean, testing games, certainly I've had a lot of fun playing those. I know certainly a few years back, they were a big thing at software testing conferences where, you know, you would go to a gaming room or a gaming party and just play all kinds of games that could loosely be related back to software testing. Zendo being an example, where you're basically trying to figure out what the pattern is, and it's I guess it's a kind of exploratory testing kind of game. So I've had lots of fun playing some of those. I don't recall ever playing a mystery game though. Matt, have you got some experience with those yourself?
Yeah, well, there's one you could think of it. The easiest one is a literal murder mystery night at your local community place, right? It's a dinner, and then you have a simulation, and then you have to figure out who done it. Clue. Well, actually, that's not a good example. Black Stories is a better example because they're riddles.
What
and for
was
some
that? Sorry, Black Stories. Did you
Black
say?
Stories, you can Google that. Yeah,
Okay.
they're riddles, and they're how did the person die, or who did the murder, and there are other games that are riddles that are not. I'm not so keen on the murder part, but there are various kinds of mystery games that children play, and for some reason, testers seem to like these pattern matching. Gosh, there's another one. Remember and send the link. There's another one that involves three kinds of patterns, and then you've got to match everything. Everything either matches or it doesn't. You set.
Yeah, I've got that one. My kids
game.
love it.
Yeah, it's a pattern recognition game. So, yeah, so testers seem to like these sorts of games, and there is a debate about the value of these games. Like, I've never seen anyone actually improve by playing the dice game kind of claims. So you can use them for interviews to just see how curious and active this person's mind is. That's absolutely the case.
Yeah.
Testers tend to like them. And I do think that they can be valuable in pattern recognition and heuristics. Can this person play this game and create a strategy over time that they get better at? Yeah. Can they troubleshoot? Can they learn to debug? There's tons and tons of tester skills that are hidden in those things. And they're easy icebreakers, and they're easy to get. So you might want to do a brown bag and or tester game night or that sort of thing. And the kind of people that tend to be interested in deliberate practice tend to be interested in those sorts of games. It's kind of a safe overlap.
So Matt, you've got some experience of teaching some of this stuff in the wild. In particular, the palindrome testing challenge is a workshop that I believe you've had some success with. Do you want to tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. Yeah, I teach a class called Lean Software Testing. Palindrome is one of the ones we have published and given away, and you can run yourself. I think you might find that if I'm running it, it's a little different. But if you go to Sticky Minds and look up Palindrome, I'm sure you'll find it, stickyminds.com.
We'll include it on the blog post as well.
Yeah, this was when I was actually asked as an interview with Microsoft, a job interview. They just asked me verbally, how would you test a palindrome? And the palindrome is the same word backwards and forwards. So you have a little program that takes an input and tells you whether or not it's a palindrome. And we went to the workshop on teaching test design in Columbus, Ohio, a couple of years ago. And Justin Rohrman and I forget the other teammate's name, but they took that idea and turned it into a website. In Excelon, we took it and we made that website responsive design and published it, wrote a little article about it eventually. We made a little test exercise. And what I found interesting is that in that test exercise, we did it as a simulation. We did it at Test Retreat. And it's a simulation of a real test environment, right? So you've got uncertainty, ambiguity, vague requirements, time pressure, not a lot of access to resources. We did that on purpose as a simulation to sort of get people really good at that. If you can get really good at that environment, you, I think, can be very successful as a tester. And you'll be hard to lay off, hard to outsource, hard to replace. So that's all the selfish reasons to do it. Plus, it's a whole lot more fun. So we did this palindrome exercise, and people had a reaction that I think was not dissimilar from post-traumatic stress disorder. I mean, people were upset. People were angry. I wouldn't work in a job like that. I used to work in a job like that. I hated a job like that. I'm never going back to the job like that. You're not fair. This isn't fair. This is terrible. And I was like, yeah, it's a holodeck. We cranked up we cranked it up to 11 so that when you see that in real life at a lower level, you'll know how to deal with it to develop skills. But obviously it needed better framing. So last year I did the same exercise publicly at the, instead of 11 people in the room, there was more like 60 at CAS, that conference for the Association for Software Testing. And we had a warning slide. And we said, this might trigger you. This is going to ask you to provide testing that stands up to scrutiny under conditions of uncertainty and ambiguity and time pressure. And it may be very much like a job you used to have. And if you will be triggered, if this will make you uncomfortable, maybe you go to a different session. And then I turned around and waited for 2 minutes. Nobody left. And then we did the exercise. And at the end of that, with 60 odd people in there, there were still 3 that came to me and said, Matt, this made me really uncomfortable. I didn't like it. It wasn't pleasant. Like, yeah. Like, do you remember the slide that said that might happen? Oh, okay. I guess you covered your bases there. But I think that we need this kind of stuff. We need real challenging exercises to show people what it's really like so they can develop skills in multiple directions, develop skills in dealing with executives that don't see our job the same way we do, and then communicating with product owners that might not see the software the same way we do or the same way the customers might, and trying to get an eye for what matters to the customers and dealing with vague statements about how rounding works, right? Because if we don't do that, what we end up doing is we have a stupid argument with the programmer and say it does this, and the programmer says, right, that's what it's supposed to, and we bring the product owner over and we say it does that. When it says round to 2 decimals, but if you get an answer of 0, it says 0 instead of 0.00. And the PO says, oh, I never thought of that. I'll have to get back to you. And the entire project is delayed by a day. Or maybe we have to fix it. Then developer's mad at us for making him look bad and he thinks he was right anyway. Or maybe they let it slide and then we're finding the wrong bugs, in air quotes. So I think this stuff really matters.
Yep. Yeah, me too. Okay. Matt, I think we're more or less done with the body of what we wanted to talk about. If there was one thing you wanted people to take away from this webinar as an action, before we get into questions and answers, what would that thing be?
Try in the next week to actually test something that you do as a volunteer. Just get started. Pick something. Yeah. And find someone else to work with you on it. And if you want to report that back in some way back to the community over Twitter or something, that would be awesome. Or leave comments on whatever blog post this eventually becomes.
Exactly. Yeah, we're gonna post a blog on this with the video and with a bunch of links. So what we'd really like for you guys listening to do is to follow one of those links, find some software to practice your testing on, practice your testing deliberately, and post what you did as a comment on the blog, and I will certainly provide you with some feedback. Matt, is that something you'd be able to do as well?
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah, great. So we'll be watching the blog for comments, and where feedback is requested, then either Matt or myself will help you out where we can. All right, awesome. Thank you, Matt. So just before we get into to questions and answers, we got some results from our poll that we carried out earlier. So if you'll recall, we had a hypothesis as to the percentage of our audience that were kinesthetic learners over visual, auditory, and reading and writing. And it looks as though our hypothesis was correct. So The figures are in at 2% auditory learning style, 13% reading and writing, 25% visual, and a whopping 60% kinesthetic. So that's a big majority there. Thank you to everybody who responded to the poll. All right, so we've got a few questions. I'm gonna plug some at random. So here's the first one. Okay, what if you're not a kinesthetic learner? What if you don't learn by doing? What if you want to take a testing course or do something classroom based? Any recommendations? You talked about the Blackbox software testing course a little bit earlier. Are there some other courses folk can do?
Well, it depends on what you're trying to learn. So if you want to get good at testing, I mean, it's like saying, I'm a visual learner, Matt, how should I play tennis? Well, you're probably going to want to play some tennis. Even if you're a visual learner, it's a sport, and you're probably going to want to play some tennis. There are classes that do use a lot of visuals. So in this space, Rob Severin has a class called Just-in-Time Testing that does have a fair amount of integrated content. Both he does a good job bouncing between visual, auditory, and kinesthetic. The rapid software testing classes by Satisfice and Develop Sense are good, and I would say the Blackbox software testing is probably the most of the Heusser reading and writing visual learners, more than the kinesthetics. And that's free, or not, sorry, it's online, so you don't have to travel to it, and it's $200 US, something like that, for 6 weeks of 10 hours a week. But most people tell me it's a lot more than 10. Most people tell me you're going to have your day job and you're going to do BBST, and that's about it. Till the course, and that's the foundations. And there's a couple of them. There's a test design. There's a bug advocacy one. I think those are the 3 right now. And Dr. Kem Kainer does. He uses, it's his intellectual property. He originally developed it, then he gave it away. But he has his own fork of that course that he teaches. And of course, at Excelon we have a course called Lean Software Testing. We have a most of that is a continuous improvement method that can be applied to any style of testing, but we do have a solid day of traditional testing methods and activities. So there's classrooms you can take. If you really just want to learn process, there's lots of process where you will just look at PowerPoint all day and never actually do any testing in a 2-day course. I would say that's usually of marginal value. Like maybe if you're having huge process challenges, you need that, but that's going to be disconnected from the work you're doing every day.
Yep. I've got another question here. So a kata is the same moves over and over again. What would you say are the highest value testing moves I should be practicing? Interesting.
Yeah. So I think, and Dwayne Green is checking me on the back channel, right? So it depends on who you are, but you want to get out of your comfort zone. You want to pick what area you need to improve on, and when you start, you will have no idea, and you need to create your buffet and then figure out what you want to have a main meal of, right? So usually with people that I work with, quick attacks is the first thing. Unless their developers are already pre-trained and they're getting the software of reasonably high quality out of the gate, quick attacks is a generic strategy that allows you to find a large number of bugs in a very short time period without any previous knowledge of the software. So that's one, and there are different trainings and exercises you can do around that. You can Google quick attacks and test any broken software and you'll find stuff. Yeah, so that's what, get out of your comfort zone, and usually I lead with quick attacks. After that, we're probably going to be talking about failure modes by platform. right? Which quick attacks is actually like this often happens on the web. But so on a tablet, you're going to want to turn it sideways and see if the UI changes. And after platform, you're going to want to learn analysis techniques. So that's what the fancy term for that is, domain analysis. But you're going to look at all of the different combinations of things and figure out what are the few most powerful things you can do that cover the most space of the software. Maybe they're not as relevant as they used to be, but sort of state transition diagrams. And I don't literally draw a state map, and I haven't in years, but I look at all the different ways you can walk through the software and then try to take paths in ways that are maybe a little bit different than the programmer intended and see what happens. So there's 4 or 5 different particular skills I'd start on.
Okay, yeah, those sound great. Okay, I think we're gonna take one more question and then we're gonna wrap things.
Oh, Dwayne is telling me one more thing I should mention, and that is the games, right? Games that allow you to build a mental model of how things work and then can create a hypothesis to see if it is consistent with that model can be very powerful. So the ability to construct mental models is not only a skill in and of itself, but it's going to make more skill acquisition easier.
Sure. So Zendo was a game like that I mentioned earlier. We talked about Set as well. Are there any others that you'd recommend to help out with that particular skill?
Car Wars. When you actually had to build a car, or sometimes called Auto Duel, although it's a little bit old, it's by Steve Jackson Games. Basically, any game that involves trade-offs of, in Car Wars, you have a vehicle, you have a limited dollar amount, bigger vehicles cost more, and when you put armor on the car, it has more heavier weight the bigger the vehicle is. And the vehicle can only have a certain amount of weight, only has a certain amount of space. So you put a bigger engine in it, you're going to have less space for your weaponry. And if you put smaller engine, it's going to accelerate slower and have a slower top speed. And then do you want to buy the fancy tires or not? And then there's all these constantly making trade-offs. Any game that involves creating something and making trade-offs is going to be a good one for that.
Okay, sounds good. So I've got one more question here. It sounds as though it's from a testing community member. If deliberate practice can't be applied in its strictest sense, how do we move the field forward, the field of testing, to make it where deliberate practice can be applied?
Well, that's kind of a, if not A, how A. So that, like, if I understand that correctly, that's if not A, how A in the future. But yeah, I would say that it's not gonna be like soccer. It's not gonna be like piano. It's not gonna be like guitar. That doesn't mean you can't do it. So we can find a series of challenges that are variations upon a theme and then run those challenges whilst trying to learn.
Yeah.
And then maybe come back in 6 months or a year after you've forgotten it and you can run them again. Yeah. Or for that matter, if you've got a website that is being deployed frequently, and it's not that critical, like your developer friend wrote a URL shortener and wants you to test it every day because he's going to deploy every day. There are things you could do to move that in the direction of deliberate practice. Is kata a good metaphor? Yeah, I think so. Does this testing kata look like a development kata or a martial arts kata? No, I don't think it does. So
yeah, just another spin on that question as well, I think, is that from a sort of community perspective, it's all of our responsibility to kind of own the problem, right? If we're not in a place where where we can practice deliberately right now, then let's get involved in and engage with the community and provide a place where that stuff can be done. And that could be, you know, at a local level by getting involved in meetups and things like that, or it could be through engaging on, you know, social forums and stuff like that as well, right?
Yeah. Now Dwayne is pinging me on the back channel again. Maybe he should get a Do Rock webinar soon. He mentioned the workshop on self-education in software testing, which was whose, which I was the lead organizer for that, gosh, 3-4 years ago now, and Dwayne is actually looking at doing another one. And we actually made a wiki, and we brought in experts, and then we had created content about, well, first we made a large affinity diagram of all the skills in testing, and then we take a skill in testing and try to document what is it, how do you get better at it, what are some resources to get better at it. If you wanted to tell, what's an example of it, we had like 4 or 5 things, and then we built out this wiki, which is available publicly, which it's time probably to go back in again. But that way you could have gone through it and you could pick, well, this is an area I want to improve on. This tells me how to improve it, right?
Yeah. That sounds useful. Make sure you send us over a link to all of that stuff so that we can share it with folk on the blog. Dwayne, if you're listening, send me an email. Okay, so I think we're going to have to wrap it up at this point. Matt, thank you so much for joining us today. Presumably, if folk want to stay in touch with you directly, they can do that via your company website, xndev.com, or you're on Twitter as mheusser. Do you want to? What does xndev do? Do you want to tell us real briefly about that?
Sure. It's Excelon development, although that URL xndev has become associated with us so well that some people just call us xndev. We're a consulting company. I would say, if you look at my LinkedIn, it says what I do is I build engineering communities. So you have this sort of skills snowball that is rolling downhill, and it gets bigger as it goes. So we kind of pack it and start the rolling, and maybe try to accelerate it. And we do that in a lot of different ways. So if you want a consultant to come in to help you get started, we do that. If you want some training, the Lean Software Testing course, Lean Software Delivery, we do that. If you want someone to do the work embedded with the team for months at a time, who's going to kind of demonstrate this, let's try it this way, let's try it that way, I wonder what would happen. We do a lot of contracting. We do placement, where we just find you the right candidate who can do the work as a regular employee, is going to help you build that. And we partner with companies like Gurok to do a lot of the public work, the writing, to give people ideas. If you want to get in touch with me right now, we are in the middle of rebooting our website. It's taking way too long. And we've just moved our little service, software delivery 24/7, to Slack. So there's a little Slack community that is starting. So if you get in touch with me, we could probably get you in. And get you talking to a bunch of people online that are interested in developing their skills as testers. So
great.
That's probably the way to, if nothing else, get started with that, and let's talk.
All right, cool. Okay, and you can stay in touch with me either on the Gurok blog, or you can jump from there into the TestRail forums. I'm on Twitter, LinkedIn, I got a personal blog as well. So feel free to reach out to me for anything TestRail related. And I guess it just remains for me to say a big thank you to everybody who joined the webinar. We hope you all enjoyed it and took a lot away from it. Like we mentioned, we have recorded this webinar. It will be posted on the blog in a matter of hours once the video has been processed. We'll put a bunch of links on there as well for you to follow and go off and try stuff out. We'd really appreciate it if you left comments on the blog so that we can see what you have done to kind of implement deliberate practice in your career, in your context, and we will respond to those comments as and when we see them. Matt, thank you so much for joining us. It's been very illuminating speaking with you, and I hope we can do so again soon. In the meantime,
Sure.
if you want to go away and download our Skills for Agile Testers ebook, you can do that as well. If you want to follow up with some more reading, if you're a reading, seeing type of learner, then that's available for you. And also, if you're not already using TestRail, then please go and give it a try via the free trial link. Thanks once again, Matt Heusser, for joining us today. Thanks, Chris, in the background for technical support. Thanks, everybody, for joining the webinar. And I hope to see you at the next one. Bye-bye.
You're welcome. Thank you.